Hello, coming at you recorded live. Hello, YouTube. It's Uncle Reggie over here again, doing my thing. What I got here today is I'm gonna be doing a little bit of a educational. Not sure exactly how to say that. Educational video. This time it's gonna be on George Orwell's uh, famous book. If you could read that, 1984. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna kick up the light here. Hello. George Orwell. Oh, that's even worse. Hello. George Orwell's 1984. Okay. It's a paperback version, but same words are in it. We've got cliff notes from George Orwell's 1984. Incidentally, he has a copyright of 1984. All right, the thing about copyrights is the further back you go in time, you see, the further back you go, the more honest people tended to be. You understand? In the last 10 or 15 years, that I've noticed things have been weird, to say the least, as far as definitions of words have been changed. The word fascist has changed in 1989. Merriam-Webster's changed the word in Stanford, and all these elitists, they change words to mean different things than they were. If you look back in time, even the word fascist has been changed. They added the word right wing to it, to where it kind of excludes the left wing, which is interesting to say the least. It's kind of intertwined because in the book 1984, there's a thing called One Thing, and I'm going to get started off here with George Orwell's. There's a little bit biography, his life and career will be the first part of this. I don't know if you could read that or not. Life and career, and just little notes on who he was to let you know what he was thinking when he was writing his best works. Now, he's written other works besides. He wrote Animal Farm, and there's a couple other key books that George Orwell wrote. And a lot of people are trying to claim George Orwell as being theirs. That's not the purpose of what I'm doing here. I'm just going to be reading out of here. Just a little bit at a time, too. Little bitty bites. Baron Trump. Little bitty bites. But just to let you know who he was and what he was thinking when he was writing these books. Okay, so without further ado, let's start off. George Orwell, whose real name was Eric Blair, true story, was born in 1903 in Bengal, India. He was born in India. He was Indian. George Orwell was Indian. An actual Indian, not American Indian. By birth. The son of a minor official in the Indian Civil Service. Okay? He was the son of a minor official in the Indian Civil Service. So his dad worked for the government. As was customary, his mother brought him back to England when he was 8 to be educated, along with his 2 sisters. So he had a couple sisters, too. He wasn't a lonely child. George Orwell had 2 sisters. This comes in play later, but we'll just leave it at that for now. Orwell was sent to a boarding school on the South Coast, a school whose students were largely sons of the wealthy. Okay? So he went to school with a bunch of rich kids. That's kind of important. That's how he was raised. He 8 years old. He gets pulled out of India, which was pretty populated, and he'd been hanging around with just regular Joes. His dad was a civil servant. Not a huge job. Kind of like being a cop here, or I don't know. This is a regular middle class family, and he went to school with a bunch of rich kids. To attract such students, the school concentrated mainly on cramming boys for entrance to Harrow and Eton. Eton. I don't know if it's a hard E or a soft E. Orwell was one of few boys allowed to attend at the lower tuition, and practice followed to ensure the winning of scholarships for the honor of the school. So you understand he was basically blessed in, you know. He was not a rich kid, but he was blessed in. He was kind of like I don't know, how would you say it? Kind of like he wasn't one of the guys, you know what I'm saying? He was an outsider. We'll just say that he was an outsider. So he might have been bullied a little bit. You know, I'm thinking, you know, because I've been an outsider before. I know what it's like to be bullied. Some of my best friends were bullies to me. And he came from what he himself called the lower upper middle class. Okay, the lower upper middle class. Okay, so. Okay, he was middle class. And hence was subjected to the snobbery of the other boys and the headmaster and his wife. He's kind of bullied. He was pushed around a little bit by the hoity-toities. Yeah. Or went to Eton in 1917 on a scholarship. The atmosphere was freer there. He made friends and he read a good deal. He also encountered for the first time popular, liberal, and socialist ideas. Such ideas were common subjects of discussion at Eton, especially in the period immediately following the First World War. So he was introduced to these ideas at that school. He'd never heard of stuff like this before, and which is kind of, huh? You know, what do you mean? Yeah, never heard of this stuff before. When he graduated in 1921, he decided not to go on to a university, although he could have. Instead, he joined civil service and went to Burma as a sergeant in the Indian Imperial Police. So he's a cop. He's a sergeant. You know. Orwell served in Burma from 1922 to 1927 as a policeman. He was, of course, the embodiment of British imperialism to the natives. So they were kind of, you know, a painful reversal of roles in the comparison to his life as a schoolboy. He intensely disliked being the instrument by which power was exerted over the Burmese. On the other hand, he had to play the part of the one in authority. So he was kind of like a typical cop here. He just, you know, he's got to enforce the law, but man, some of the laws are he's kind of like a cop here, you know. I got to enforce the law, you know. I hate to arrest you, but I got to, you know, that kind of thing. So that goes for about 80% of the police here, by the way. When he returned to England on leave in 1927, he resigned his post. He did it for 5 years, man. He said, I'm done. I'm out. This is stupid. So when he resigned his post, he says, forget it. I'm not going to do this no more. For various reasons, not all the men, all of them were clear. Even to Orwell himself, he deliberately chose to live among the working class people in Paris, among the tramps in England for more than a year. These experiences, turn the page, formed the basis for his first book, an autobiographical work he called Down and Out in Paris and London, published in 1933. Although he had published some early writing in his real name, the first book he used the name George Orwell. He later explained that the book that he took the last name from an English river near where he once lived, and the first name was being typically English. So George was typically an English name, and Orwell was the name of a river. In any case, it was probably a symbolic act of signaling his choice of vocation, as well as his attitude towards his own country. So he was a nationalist. Can't make it up. I'm just processing this as I read it too. He's an English nationalist, by the way, and I think he was white. So you take it for what it's worth. He wasn't a Nazi. During these years, Orwell worked as a teacher, and after he married his wife, kept a village pub and a village general store. His income was small, and his first book brought him very little. His first novel, Burmese Days, based on experience of Burma, came out in 1934. You see. 1935, he published another novel, A Clergyman's Daughter, which makes use in part of his teaching experience. Although by now he had received critical comment in a few places. Critical comment in a few places. Okay, he was people were kind of like mad at him and stuff. Critical comment. Orwell was not making enough income from his writing to depend on it entirely. His novel Keep the Epidestria. What the hell is an epidestria? Keep the Epidestria Flying, published in 1936, was based on his experience at the time as a clerk in the bookstore. He worked in a bookstore. You see where this is headed? You see, he worked in a bookstore. He worked in a Barnes and Nobles. Might as well have been a barista. Let's continue. I can see where this is. Oh, first sentence. He became a socialist during this period. And when his publisher encouraged him to visit a depressed industrial area and write about his personal reactions, industrial area, and write his personal reaction, he took the opportunity to put his political convictions into action. The results of this trip, The Road to Wigan Pier, came out in 1937. Now this, incidentally, is when Hitler started his rise. So if you're in Europe, in 1937, Hitler's been in office for 4 years, and he's starting his shit, right? And well underway. 1937. You were either a Nazi or a socialist, or you were dead. You had to force to take sides on that one. Meanwhile, the Spanish Civil War had broken out. Oh yeah, the Spanish Civil War. I forgot all about that. Yeah, yeah. Spain had a civil war. They're doing it again because of this other thing they got going on there. Man, I can't even forget. It's so much information going on right now. Spain is going through another civil war right now. Probably because of the same stuff. And although Orwell was, as an observer and reporter, he found himself enlisting in the Republican side. By chance, he joined the militia, loyal to POUM, a Marxist, anti-Stalinist political party. Anti-Stalinist, but he was a Marxist. Anti-Stalinist. That's confusing to me. But we'll continue. Anti-Stalinist party. Rather than the better known, at least in America at the time, International Brigade, which was ultimately communist controlled. He was badly wounded in the front, and by the time he recovered from his wound, as a Republican government was dominated by the communist groups responsive to direction from Russia, and the purge of other political parties, including POUM, was underway. Orwell and his wife were forced to leave Spain for fear of imprisonment and possible summary execution. The commies wanted to kill him because he was anti-Stalinist. Yeah, commies wanted to kill him. And his wife. But he was a socialist. There are degrees to this lefty thing here. But yeah, he didn't like Stalin. He didn't mind socialism so much, but he hated Stalin. So the Stalinists wanted to kill him. Oh boy. Oh man. Execution. His experience in the Spanish Civil War were recorded in Homage to Catalonia, published in 1938. Upon his return to England, Orwell published another novel, Coming Up for Air, in 1939. This was the first of his books to sell it all well. The war which had predicted this the war that he had predicted in this book was soon underway. Although he tried to get into the army, he was rejected for service because of his health. In spite of the tuberculosis which he suffered all his life, he was accepted in the Home Guard. During the Second World War, he worked for a time in the Indian service of the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC. 2 more books. He worked for the BBC. See where this is going? 2 more books, collector's essays, appeared in 1940, 1941. Inside the Whale and other essays. The Lion and the Unicorn, Socialism and the English Genius. In addition, during this time, Orwell did a great deal of political writing. Regular column As I Please appeared in the London Tribune, and he contributed to Observer, Manchester Evening News, Partisan Review, and The New Leader. 1945, Orwell published the first of 2 of his books in which he generated his known Animal Farm. Like 1984, an anti-utopian novel. Important. It is cast in the form of animal satire. The obvious subject of the satire is Soviet Russia, but more generally, it has to do with totalitarianism of any kind. The success of the book, especially in the United States, gave Orwell an income he had never before enjoyed. Dickens, Dolly, and others. Studies in Popular Culture, another collection of essays, appeared in 1946. With the death of his wife in the same year, Orwell had the complete care of his adopted son. In order to find the time to complete the book, which embodied the ideas concerned him most at the time, he moved to the Scottish Hebrides, Hebrides, Hebrides. His most collected book, 1984, was published in 1949. In it, Orwell represents a society of near future which is projection of certain aspects of life in the contemporary world, although he remained paperbacks. Although he remarried and was planning a new work for the future, Orwell died in London early 1950 from poor health and exhaustion. I'm kind of tired too. 2 other collections of essays appeared shortly after his death: Shooting an Elephant and Other Essays. In 1950, Such Were the Joys, in 1953. Dude's publishing books after he's dead. I think his sisters might have had something to do with that. 1984, and Anti-Utopian Fiction. Hello. What does it say? Can you read it? Okay, take a screenshot. It lasts longer. Filthy animals. The tradition of utopian fiction. Fiction predicted in the possibility of a perfect existence of man is very old. As old as the story of the Garden of Eden in Genesis. At least for the Western world. It was, a perfect place, utopia. That's what utopia is. It's a perfect place where nobody's sad, everybody wears gray clothes. Utopia, there's no such thing as sickness. There's no such thing as unhappiness. Everybody's happy. Everybody running around happy. Nobody mad. There's no inequality. It's utopia. It embodies both nostalgia for a legendary golden age and hope for a way that man might live in some distant future. Might live in some distant future. Although the Republic of Plato is older, the name of this kind comes from fiction. This kind of fiction comes from Sir Thomas More's Utopia, published in Latin in 1516. Utopia is a book. In it, a character discovers a land called Utopia, or nowhere, since served as or nowhere land. Nowhere land. He's a real nowhere. Everything is nowhere land. Beatles song. Popular work. It was translated in English in 1551 and has since served as a model for readers to share More's purpose. Francis Bacon's The New Atlantis, 1626, and Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, 1726, are a further example of utopian models. Now, Gulliver's Travels was that was actually a pretty good one, man. The guy gets shipwrecked and a bunch of little dudes pinned him down and tied him to the beach. But he was like a giant, so he just jumped up. And they ended up all being friends and stuff. But yeah, these guys were scared of him because he was such a big giant. But he ended up kicking ass for him. It was pretty cool, Pretty cool Gulliver to do that. Whatever. 19th century was particularly interested in the idea of utopia, both in literature and social experiments. Social experiments. Yeah, like communism. It's a social experiment, man. You guys are failing. You guys let Karl Marx down. I can't believe that. In English literature, there are two books: Samuel Butler's Irwan is nowhere spelled backwards, 1872, and William Morris's News from Nowhere. News from Nowhere. Those are backwards ass words. In 1891, Tennyson and Lockley Hall. English are crazy people. They write things backwards and write a book about it. That's preposterous. Cenk Uygur. Preposterous. Another thing. Cenk Uygur, man. He keeps saying preposterous. Preposterous. The word is preposterous, you dumbass. Freaking retard. Locksley Hall writes of seeing a vision of the world in which finally man learns to live at peace with himself in the federation of the world. In American literature, Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, 1888, and Herman Melville's Typee, 1846, and Omoo, O-M-O-O, are examples of the same impulse to see man from an uncorrupted state. This desire is related to the phenomenon of the frontier in American history. The West followed the possibility of establishing an ideal society, community-free, of historical evils, free of historical evils that man had always suffered in Europe. When the peaceful community that Huckleberry Finn and his companion Jim established in a raft disrupted the world, Huck eventually decides to light out for the territory. Twain accurately reflects the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, the impulse to flee the frontier and away from civilization. This is echoed in our own time in Holden Caulfield's desire to establish community of the innocent somewhere in the West, and J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. But these were all books I had to read in high school. I remember having to read all these books. Mandatory. Go figure. Men in the 19th century believed that perfectibility of mankind and the real possibility of an ultimate utopia, a time where all men would live together in a united world in a state of peace. But the events of history in the 20th century have undermined that belief. Both cold and hot wars have followed each other in quick succession. Revolution and civil wars have clouded the orderly progress of man towards some of the better future. Totalitarianism I nailed it that time, has become fact and can hardly be ignored. From Hitler's Germany to the Russia and Stalin, later Soviet leaders, the doctrine that man can be disrupted for purposes other than that of developing the best of his nature is, of course, directly opposed to the belief in man's perfectibility. Belief in man's perfectibility. Yeah. See, these are beliefs now. Beliefs are kind of funny because people go to war over beliefs, and they live and die for beliefs. And Stalinism and Hitler's Nazism, they didn't believe. They didn't believe. They don't believe in things. It's just like you commonly see today. These cringy progressives, they don't believe in anything. They have no hope. So, in our time has arisen what some critics will call the anti-utopian novel, a kind of fiction which shows man at the mercy of purpose, over which he has no control. Not man perfected, but man perverted. In this way, the anti-utopian novels views the future. The motive for this new kind of novel may arise from the certainty that man can now destroy not only himself as an individual, but all of mankind. That governments can bend people to any kind of purpose whatsoever. Usually such anti-utopian novels are intended as a criticism of the time in which the author lives. But this was the case with 19th century utopian novels. Shortly after the Animal Farm, itself anti-utopian novel, Orwell published a brief essay on the Russian writer Eugene Zetman. We, speaking readers, we is the name of the band. We, which although it appeared in 1924, was little known to English-speaking readers. It is said by some critics that there are similarities between 1984 and We. So Orwell might have just plagiarized this from a Russian. Just saying. What's this in here? It's very much similar to a book that was written about 20 years before. There's no honor among thieves. Certainly Orwell was much impressed by the novel. He read it during the time when he was thinking about his own 1984. In his essay on We, Orwell himself says that it bears some resemblance to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, 1932. But in his opinion, what is a better novel? So he read both of these books, and Huxley's probably English too. Three writers in the same time, all interested in the idea of anti-utopia, should produce books with some similarities. Is hardly a surprise. Of the three, only Orwell depicts a society whose purpose was solely of that of power. For this reason, 1984 has caused more discussion and has made more readers uneasy than either of the other two. Although Zetman's novel is still not well known to the Western world. So we're going to check out that one later. We, by what's the guy's name? Eugene Zamitin. Eugene Zamitin. Zamiatin. The anti-utopian novel is a specialized branch of fiction, like the novel of ideas, for instance, and it is true that the author of such novel is mainly concerned with depicting a certain kind of society. But since he's writing a novel, by necessity, he must use the means available to any novelist: plot, setting, characterization, point of view, structure, and the like. To say that he bends these formal aspects to his purpose is only to describe What any good novelist does. Success with which he makes the reader accept the reality he has created is the only meaningful test of his ability as a writer. Orwell, after all, had written several novels before the producer, either Animal Farm or 1984. By the time of these later books, he was no longer satisfied with the novel he had written, and turned the anti-utopian novel into the most effective means of embodying his of his urgent purposes. Oh, geez. He said, "Oops, I wrote the wrong book." Let's see here. Brief synopsis. Winston Smith. Okay, now we're getting into the book here. The book of 1984. It's a fictional book, obviously. It was written about a future. Winston Smith is the main character of the book, and there's various similarities between Orwell's career and Winston Smith. So there's a little bit of reflection, projection, I guess you might want to call it, maybe. Winston Smith, who works in the records department of the Ministry of Truth, revising the past as it appears in newspapers, dissatisfied living conditions under the inflexible, outwardly government of Oceania, epitomized by the ever-present picture of Big Brother. His dissatisfaction, increased by the austerity characteristic of daily life. At first, he rebels in small ways, writing a diary. That wasn't allowed. Yeah, I read that part. It was not allowed. You couldn't read. You couldn't write things. He had to hide in the corner. There was cameras everywhere. He had to hide in the corner, like next to his desk. Make sure, under, there's like a light outside that he'd write in, and he got busted. Writing a diary, it had viewed with suspicion by the thought police, speculating about political orthodoxy of O'Brien, an important official in the governing oligarchy. Becoming unaccountably disturbed with a young woman who watches him, dreaming over and over of an idyllic scene in which sexual expression is natural as the landscape. Winston even goes amongst... Yeah, you weren't supposed to do that. Yeah, you weren't supposed to... you weren't supposed to fall in love and stuff. So Winston goes among the proles and excluded seeking any kind of human contact. The young woman, Julia, instigates a liaison between herself and Winston, and they make love in a scene exactly like that in his dreams. Yeah. He knows that their lovemaking is political in meaning, and is an overt act of